faces here. And good morning to all our officers and our guests as well. So first of all, we'll go straight into the steering. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. As a reminder, before I call the Sedate this morning, today's proceedings will be recorded and will be subject to delayed broadcast on the Council's website. In terms of the Sedate, Councillor Maitland.
Here.
We have an apology this morning from Provost Todd. Councillor Friel. Councillor Cowan.
Here.
Councillor Mackay. Councillor Mackay. Apologies. Thank you. We also have an apology this morning from Councillor Barton. Councillor Holland.
Here, thanks.
Councillor Lennox.
Good morning. Here, thanks.
We have an apology from Councillor Crawford. Councillor Watts.
I'm here.
Councillor Filson. Councillor Hogg. And Councillor Stewart.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. And just before we get started this morning, I'm going to hand over to legal. Craig was going to have a few words with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware that the next item on the agenda is in relation to declarations of interest. Members will be aware that in December of last year, the Council's Code of Conduct was substantially updated and reissued for members. In the updating, it makes it more in the first person, but also seeks to clarify the nature and extent of the duties on elected members in terms of that code. As a consequence, members, we have sought to make some changes to the way that declarations of interest will be and are being recorded in council minutes. So where previously members may have sought just to say that they have either a financial or a non-financial interest in relation to a particular item and have given a bit more of an explanation around that, members will be aware that the new revised code that was issued in December has sought more to link any financial or non-financial interest to a connection. So it's about the nature of the connection that you have having regard to, given what the Planning Committee here today, the nature of the connection to an application, an applicant, an objector, so that in terms of any declarations that may require to be declared going forward, what we would need to know is, as we did before, whether it's financial or non-financial, but we have to now look at and just note it's in relation to a connection regarding that item of business. So there's a slight change to how we require to record any declarations, but pretty much it's about tying it back to what is the nature of the connection that you have to that particular application. Members will also be aware that the code brought in a new basis where it's not necessarily declaring an interest, but in the interest of transparency, you can still declare that you may have a non-financial connection to an item, but it's not significant enough that would require you to withdraw from the meeting. So that was brought in with the new revised code as well. And that is just more where, in the interest of transparency, you feel you maybe need to put something on the record, but it wouldn't prevent you, leaving. Clearly, if you are formally declaring an interest, then the normal rules would be, if it is a significant interest, you would be declaring and not taking part in the item. So it was just to flag up. There's a few kind of new nuances to the revised code just going forward. And when you see the minutes, you'll maybe see changes in wording round about any declarations that are made. But we just thought we would kind of raise that or flag that up at the start, just in case you wonder or look and see any changes to how the minutes are worded in relation to declarations going forward.
Thank you. And I will ask for any declarations of interest. Right, thank you. Lynn, could you possibly go through the hearing process, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The hearing will begin with the Chief Governance Officer or his representative giving an overview of the planning application. The objectors will then present their objections to committee in support of their previous written submissions. Members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the objectors on the submissions made. Members, please note that this is not to be taken as an opportunity to comment on the merits or otherwise of the planning application. The applicant or the agent will then address the committee in support of the application, and again, members have the opportunity to ask any questions of them. Again, members, please note that this is not to be taken as an opportunity to comment on the merits or otherwise of the planning application. At this stage, the hearing will then close. Following that, appropriate clarification will be given by any officers present today, following which the committee will move to determination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So first order of business this morning's agenda item 3, and it's the planning application number 21/0092/PP. This is an application for planning permission for the erection of up to 9 wind turbines of up to maximum tip height of 145 metres and associated infrastructure at Polcairn Wind Farm B7046 from Sinclairstone to U728 Glen Connor, Scares, East Ayrshire, and that's on pages 5 to 112. Okay, and I'm going to go over to Graham, who will be presenting this morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'll keep this presentation fairly brief. The committee report sets out the details of the case, so I just intend to provide you with an overview and focus on the key issues this morning. This is an application for Polcairn Wind Farm, which would be located south of Sinclairstone and to the east of Rankinstone, with access being taken from the B7046, and you can see that on the slides there. The site layout can be seen here. The proposed wind farm would comprise 9 turbines up to maximum blade tip height of 145 metres. There are a number of different turbine heights proposed across the development, ranging from 100 metres up to 145 metres to blade tip height. Other associated infrastructure includes access tracks, watercourse crossings, crane pads, 2 borrow pits, a substation, temporary construction compound. A permanent anemometer mast of 60 metres in height is also proposed. The proposed development would have a 30-year operational lifetime. As some background and history to the application, there was a previous planning application submitted for a wind farm on this site with the planning reference 14/0860/PP, comprising 9 turbines all at 100 metres in height. This was refused by the Council in August 2017 due to ongoing aviation objections from the National Air Traffic Services in relation to impacts on aviation safeguarding resulting from the proposed development on radar systems. The applicant appealed that decision to the Scottish Government's Planning and Environmental Appeals Division in November 2017. During that appeal, National Air Traffic Services removed their objection to the proposed wind farm, and the reporter determining the appeal case granted consent for the wind farm on the 19th of September 2018. Currently, there remains a live consent for a wind farm on this very same site for 9 turbines at 100 metres to blade tip height. The current application is for the same application site and would have the same proposed infrastructure and site layout as the existing consent, with the only change now being that the scale of the turbines proposed would be larger than the consented one, all but 1 turbine, which would remain the same. In all other respects, this current proposal is the same as the previous one. As to proposed infrastructure, with the exception of the turbines themselves, would be the same as that of the previously consented scheme, then many of the impacts resulting from the proposed development would be the same as the previously assessed one, which were found to be acceptable for the consented development. Impacts such as hydrology, geology, ecology, traffic, forestry and aviation, amongst others, are not considered to be unacceptably adverse, subject to mitigation. As set out in the committee report, consultees such as Nature Scot, SEPA, RSPB, Prestwick Airport and the Ayrshire Roads Alliance, amongst others, have not raised any objections to the proposed development, although this is subject to mitigation in many cases. Suitable planning conditions, as set out in the committee report, could be attached to any consent if granted, which would address the comments of the consultees. The Council received 6 representations from 5 individuals, although 2 have since removed their objections prior to the Planning Committee today, which means there were 4 representations from 3 people, all objecting to the proposed development. As noted previously, the key difference between the previously consented scheme and the proposed development is due to the larger turbines proposed, and these result in landscape and visual impacts, including residential visual amenity impacts, due to the increased scale of the turbines now proposed. There now follows a series of slides showing photo montages from a select number of viewpoints to provide a sense of some of the general landscape and visual impacts likely across the wider area. The slides are all taken from the environmental information and are used for context only in this presentation, with the detailed environmental information available to view as background papers. So this is a photo montage from viewpoint 1, which is on the B7046 at Belston Loch, approximately 2 kilometres from the nearest turbine. So that gives you a sense of the view that you see if it's clear on the screen or not. The second photo montage is from viewpoint 3, which is in Rankinston, approximately 1.7 kilometres from the nearest turbine. These represent some of the closest viewpoints. With increasing distance from the proposed development, the perceived scale of the turbines tend to reduce and the visual impacts are comparatively reduced. This is a photo montage from viewpoint 7 to the west of Scares and at a distance of approximately 4.5 kilometres from the nearest turbine. You can start to see that the visual impacts are comparatively less substantial compared to the earlier, more closer viewpoints. And this is a photo montage from viewpoint 9, which is at Mauchline, which is approximately 11.8 kilometres from the nearest turbine. And again, you can see the visual impacts are comparatively reduced. As commented on previously, the only notable difference between the existing consented wind farm and the current proposal before you for consideration today is that larger turbines are proposed for 8 of the 9 turbines. Now follows a series of comparative wirelines which show the consented turbines in green in the upper half of the slide and the proposed turbines in red in the bottom half of the slide. And the viewpoint in front of you at the moment is from viewpoint 1, again on the B7046 at Belston Loch, and you can see the differences between the consented scheme at the top and the proposed scheme at the bottom. The second one is a comparative wireline from viewpoint 6 at Shawkirk in Drongan, which is approximately 4.9 kilometres from the nearest turbine. Again, it's clear that the proposed turbines are larger than the previously consented ones. However, the magnitude of change is not considered to be of such a magnitude that the increased landscape or visual impacts are considered to be unacceptably adverse. And again, this is a comparative wireline from viewpoint 9 at Mauchline. And again, from further away, the perceived difference in scale is also becoming less apparent. So in terms of landscape and visual impacts, the proposed development would have some significant landscape and visual impacts and would be experienced quite widely throughout the local area. Compared to the existing consent, the proposed larger turbines and varying scales of turbines proposed does lead to greater impacts and a less uniform appearance compared to the consented scheme. However, despite the increased landscape and visual impacts, none of these impacts are considered to be of such a magnitude that they would be considered unacceptable. In terms of cumulative impacts, other consented and proposed wind farm developments throughout this area have already taken the previous Polwhairn wind farm proposal into account in their cumulative assessments. Although the increased scale of turbines currently proposed does increase landscape and visual impacts and correspondingly would have an impact on cumulative impacts, these are similarly not considered to be of a magnitude that the proposed development would be considered to cause any unacceptable cumulative impacts. Noise from the wind farm can be controlled by suitable limits, which are set out in the conditions in the committee report. The Council's noise consultant, Acon UK Limited, advised on these limits and was content that subject to these limits and based on the applicant's noise assessment, there would be no overriding reason to refuse the application in respect of noise. In terms of financial implications, should the Planning Committee be minded to approve the application in line with the recommendation, then a financial guarantee would be required to secure the costs associated with decommissioning, restoration and aftercare, and the applicant has agreed to enter into a Section 75 legal agreement with the council to address this matter, alongside a planning condition. The applicant has agreed with the council's independent consultants, Ironside Farah Limited, on the value of the financial guarantee. Should the Planning Committee be minded to refuse the application against the recommendation, then it could result in an appeal by the applicant to the Scottish Government's Environmental Appeals Division, and this would result in financial implications, including potential costs incurred in engaging expert advice, support or representation in undertaking any appeal. So to conclude, the proposed development would result in a number of significant impacts across a range of different features. However, no such impacts have been considered to be unacceptably adverse, subject to mitigation in many cases. No consultees have objected to the proposed development, subject to conditions. The applicant has agreed the costs reported by the council's independent consultants, and the required financial guarantee can be secured through a legal agreement. The proposed development is considered to accord with the development plan, and material considerations do not indicate the application should be refused. The recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions, and the decision notice should be withheld until a Section 75 legal agreement in line with council policy is completed and registered with the keeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. We're now going to proceed to the hearing, and we have Mr. Alan Chapman. Would you like to come to the front, Mr. Chapman, and
5 minutes, Chair.
5 minutes? I'm thinking the best, please.
Just to the top, yeah.
Just there. That's fine. Thank you. Okay. So welcome, Mr. Chapman. You have 5 minutes and we won't be on the dot. Okay, thank you.
I'll not be as long as 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'd first like to thank the Council for giving me the opportunity to speak at this hearing. My name is Alan Chapman and I've lived in Sinclairstone from 2006 and take an active interest in issues that impact on the local community. A planning application, as already heard, was raised with East Ayrshire Council in 2014 relating to the wind farm development at Polquhairn. I raised an objection at that time with the Council to this application due to the significant visual impact on the local communities of Rankinson, Hayhill and Sinclairstone, and also to the negative impact on radar services provided by Glasgow Prestwick Airport, GPA and NATS. This planning application was refused by EAC. The developer, however, raised an appeal with the Scottish Government. This appeal was successful, and at that point in time, the developer was able to proceed with the wind farm. NATS and the developer signed a Statement of Common Understanding, SOCU, in March 2018 to provide the necessary mitigation for the impacted radar services. As part of the SOCU, two conditions were set: that no turbines were to be built or blades fitted until there was a signed agreement that the mitigation was in place. A new planning application, 210092 PP, was raised with the Council in 2021. I believe this was granted as a Section 42 condition. A significant element of this application was that the maximum turbine blade height has been increased from the original 100 metres to 145 metres. This increase in blade height would significantly increase the visual impact on the nearby local communities and lead to an increase in interference with the radar services. A report to the Council provided by Ironside Farah in March 2022 to assess information relating to visual impacts of the wind farm stated that there was some confusion in explaining differences in effects between consented and proposed schemes, and unsupported statements on cumulative effects which don't appear to take account of the changed baseline since 2014. Finally, the report concluded that although the visual impacts were acceptable, the proposed larger turbines and increased prominence may exacerbate some of the effects. On the radar services, whilst both GPA and NATS have removed their objections, the necessary mitigation still requires to be in place for the wind farm development to take place. Whilst GPA indicates that the required mitigation will be provided within reasonable timescales, NATs do not give the same assurance and have again entered into an agreement with the new developer to work towards the necessary mitigation, with no indication of timescales and, again, that no turbines would be built or blades fitted until there was a signed agreement to the mitigation. To conclude, due to the unacceptable visual impact of the development on the skyline of the local communities of Rankison, Hayhill and Sinclairstone, which are within 2 kilometres, along with the uncertainty of the required radar mitigation being achieved within reasonable timescales, I would ask East Ayrshire Council to refuse this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. Is there anything else you wish to add?
No, that's all, thanks.
Okay. Going to now open it up.
Sorry. Good morning, Mr. Chapman. Councillor Lennox here. I just wondered if you had engaged with any of the local community groups in regards to your concerns about the new development.
So, as I said, I do take an interest, in the local issues, and I have attended the Sinclairstone and Rankson Hayhill community group, but I have not raised my concerns within that forum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? Councillor Cowan.
Thank you, Chair. It's not for Mr. Chapman, but it's on one of the points he raises about the detail of the radar mitigation. Do we have someone who can talk to that point?
Just 1 second, I'll pass over to Craig.
Sorry, Chair, perhaps we can come back to that. We're at the point in the hearing process where it's questions for the objector, but we'll note your question, and obviously Graham or David or myself can perhaps come back to that once we've moved to the next stage in terms of any council officer response.
Through you, Chair, that's what I was hoping for, clarification with someone in the room that could talk to that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cowan. We will go to clarification questions later after the hearing closure. Thank you. Is there any more questions, members? No. None online. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chapman. We now have the applicant, and that's Mr. Tom Parkin. Mr. Parkin, if you'd like to come forward. And you two have 5 minutes to speak on the subject. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and Councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Tom Parkin and I work for Ørsted. Ørsted is a globally recognised sustainability leader, and we develop energy systems that are green, independent and economically viable. We are a world leader in renewable energy. We own and operate our developments, and as a result, we would seek to become a long-term partner and neighbour within the communities in which our projects are located. The need for urgent, transformative action to tackle the global crises of climate change and ecological decline is clear. Scotland was one of the first countries in the world to declare a global climate emergency, with world-leading targets to end our contribution to climate change by 2045. As a nation, Scotland is over halfway there and ahead of the rest of the UK. But despite strong progress, we know that there is a significant challenge ahead to become a net zero nation. Clearly, addressing the climate emergency is a priority issue that extends beyond politics and is a social responsibility that must permeate all industry and development. And all industry and development to meet carefully considered and ambitious targets within national and global energy initiatives. Onshore wind is also amongst the cheapest forms of electricity production and not reliant on volatile fuel markets, which is clearly an increasing concern. The proposed development represents an increase in tip heights to an already consented application and has been fully considered against all relevant national and local planning policies. We received the planning report last week and have reviewed the comprehensive and detailed findings, which has assessed the proposed development against relevant policy of the development plan. We welcome the positive recommendation, confirming that the proposed development is acceptable and in accordance with this policy. This reflects the care that has been taken in the design of the proposed development to avoid unacceptable environmental and amenity effects, whilst ensuring that the Polcairn wind farm can make a significant contribution to Scotland's requirement for renewable energy generation, deliverable within a short timeframe. As you have heard today, our proposed wind farm would not represent a significant departure from council policy or the local development plan. In fact, the council has deemed all important material considerations as acceptable. This is highlighted by the fact that there are no objections from statutory and non-statutory consultees and reflects that the application has been prepared in accordance with relevant legislation, policy and guidance. Indeed, there has also been support from the Auchinleck Community Council and minimal local opposition. The design of the proposed development seeks to minimise negative environmental effects. The likely effects that the increased turbine heights will have on environmental receptors have been fully assessed within the Environmental Impact Assessment Report. It is integral to planning decision-making that a balancing act has to occur in respect of considering the benefits of a development against the impacts. In this case, there are clear benefits which arise from the proposed development. These include the contribution to the international and national renewable energy targets, the reduction of carbon emissions, the production of cheap local green energy, as well as notable job creation during the construction phase. These environmental and wider benefits of the proposed development are deliverable within a short time frame and outweigh the negative effects. With regards to promoting sustainability and the reduction of carbon emissions, the proposed development will result in delivery of 9 wind turbines with a total operating capacity of approximately 34.2 megawatts. This is conservatively equivalent to around about 21,000 homes, or approximately the number of homes within Kilmarnock. The generating capacity is a significant increase on that from 22.5 megawatts, which would have been achieved under the consented development. This is achieved by using more modern and efficient turbines. This increased energy generation is a critically important material consideration, which weighs in favour of the proposed development in light of the Scottish Government declaration of a climate emergency and support for the accelerated targets for emission reductions to achieve net zero by 2045. Taking into account all relevant national and local policies and material considerations, the proposed development is considered to be compliant and acceptable. Therefore, I would respectfully urge members to approve this application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parkin. Do any members have any questions?
Sorry, Mr. Harkin, could I ask you, I'm a wee bit concerned about the access road where you're going to bring the turbines in. They're really close to Sinclairson, and you're going to put a brand new road in there. When 500 yards up the road, you've got the entrance to Piper Hill for Hargreaves. I'm just wondering if you've done any negotiations or any talks with them about using their road rather than ripping up a couple of fields, basically, to put which will be a really expensive road just for a minimal time. Thanks.
So the proposed access in the application is what we intend to progress with. We haven't spoken to, I don't believe we've spoken to other parties right now about alternative accesses. That wouldn't be supported within the current planning application either. To kind of take an alternative route would have to presumably go into planning for that alternative mechanism. Of course, driving down the cost for these projects is important, so we would look at alternatives, but as things stand, the proposed access in the application, which diverts around Sinclairson, so it stops short of Sinclairson, is the only option as things stand.
I see in the papers there as well that once the turbines are in, this road will be closed. Is that correct?
Sorry, the access has been created.
Yeah,
would be
the access road.
Yes, it would be closed and, well, it would be there for wind farm access and potentially by the use of the landowner.
It said in the papers, basically, the way I was reading it, that once the turbines were in sight, that this road would be blocked off altogether and reinstated. That not the case?
Councillor Filson, do you have a page number reference? Sorry.
Apologies, I don't have that exact detail, but it would reflect the planning application.
Through you, Chair, perhaps it's something that colleagues in ARA, the planning officer, can also perhaps clarify for Councillor Filson and other members once we move to the next stage of the process, if that would also help.
That's fine, Craig. Thank you.
That's okay, Joe. Will be captured after it. Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. Why do we need to increase the height from 100 to 145? With more modern turbines, is there not similar output still at the 100 metre?
Just when the scheme was originally designed with 100 metres to tip turbines, that was in an era when there were renewable energy subsidies called the ROCs period. So there were substantial subsidies to incentivise renewable energy development, and those subsidies made smaller turbines such as 100 metres economically viable. Quite simply, right now, we operate in a subsidy-free market. There are no subsidies for onshore wind, and it doesn't economically stack up is the short answer, really. So we need to increase the tip height of the turbines.
Councillor Hogg, do you have anything to add? Thank you. Councillor Stewart, online, please.
It was just basically what Drew and Councillor Hogg had already said, but I was wondering whether they had actually spoken to any groups or any individuals within the local area of Sinclairton.
The project's been active, as you've heard today, for quite a number of years, through the first application right up until now. During the first application, there was a lot of activity in terms of consultation with the community. There were community liaison groups set up, and indeed there still is a community liaison group set up, although we haven't met for perhaps a year or so. As part of the application, we undertook public consultation in line with best practice guidance at the time. Admittedly, that was during COVID restrictions, so that was online as opposed to in person. However, we did follow that public consultation process with members of the community.
Councillor Stewart, you satisfied with that?
Just for clarity, they haven't spoke to anybody for over the past year, is that right?
I think that would be fair to say. So the application went in I believe it was February of last year. So we would have spoken to the community shortly before that application went in.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, Councillor Hogg.
Just want to clarify, so since the raise of 45 metres, you've not spoke to local community or consulted with them?
No, sorry, that's not right. So when the ahead of the application going in last year, we undertook public consultation with that revised tip height increase. And just to clarify on the tip height increase, it's only one turbine that's actually at 145 metres. The rest are either at 125 or 120 or 110 or slightly lower. But the community were fully updated on that application prior to it going in to planning.
If there aren't any further questions, then that's the hearing closed at this stage. And we will move on to
any clarifications, Graham, and roads and any other.
a reminder that roads are here today if you have any specific questions on roads, members. So Graham, I think you're going to sum up and respond to the things that were raised there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide some clarity on a couple of the points that were raised there. In terms of the aviation objections, which were subsequently removed by both NATS and Prestwick Airport, both consultees have confirmed to the council that they've entered into agreement with the applicant to deliver mitigation. Now, as I understand it, there are various steps that they have to go through in terms of testing the mitigation. I think there are test flights as well that they have to do to check, the radars working, and any upgrade that they do can adequately mitigate for the fact that there could be a wind farm that would be displayed on the radar. So, obviously, without going into technical details, I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf. I don't know the in-depth requirements, but there are steps that they have to go through, and certainly in terms of Prestwick Airport, they've confirmed that they consider that suitable mitigation can be implemented within a reasonable time frame. Previously, if they weren't convinced that it would have been implementable within a reasonable time frame, they would have retained their objection. And I think that was what happened with regards to National Air Traffic Services with the previous application. We'd waited for many years, if not, from 2014 up until the point where we took it to committee in 2017, and there hadn't been any resolution that they were confident of being delivered within a reasonable time frame. So at this point, we're being told by both Prestwick Airport and National Air Traffic Services that they believe there's mitigation that can be implemented within a reasonable time frame, and they're comfortable to remove their objections on that basis, subject to conditions, and the conditions that they've requested have been set out in the report. In terms of Councillor Filson's comments about the access tracks and roads, as I understand it, that will remain in place for the operational lifetime of the wind farm. Upon the decommissioning period at the end of the operational lifetime, there'll be a decommissioning and restoration strategy required from the applicant, and they'll need to detail what their intentions are with the tracks. Some could be removed, some will probably be reduced in terms of the width, maybe broken up and seeded, and depending on the landowner's wishes, they may retain some of them as essentially farm access for farm vehicles across the site. But yes, during the operational lifetime, the tracks will remain in place, and subject to the farmer's agreement, the public may be able to use those tracks if they wanted to walk across the site, albeit it is I feel like an active farm. And again, nothing sort of additional to add to the presentation. We've assessed it against the relevant policies and material considerations, and whilst yes, the larger turbines would result in increased landscape and visual impacts, these are not of a magnitude that would tip the balance and render the scheme, in our view, unacceptable. And that's why the recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions, and the decision notice to be withheld until a legal agreement has been delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Craig, if you'd like to continue, please.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it would just also be helpful, members, given some of the discussion here. As members are aware, the applicant has planning permission already to construct a 9 wind turbine development at this location, with an access from the main road into the site, and though the turbine heights are to 100 metres high. Now, my understanding, and Graham obviously can clarify matters for me, the only thing that is changing between what they already have planning permission for and what they are now asking for planning permission for is the height of 8 turbines within that development. So the previous application sought access into the site at this location, and a reporter appointed by Scottish ministers, as I understand it, approved that access and felt that that access was acceptable. There would not appear to be any change that I'm aware of, or any material changes between that application and this application. And therefore, what I would certainly say is that decision is a significant material consideration for you members today to take account of. So effectively, the baseline here is this is not you considering, in essence, you're not starting from scratch, if I can put it that way. The baseline is that through a reporter at the DPEA, they have already agreed that a 9 wind turbine development at this location can be appropriate. The issue and what it does come down to is the difference is the increase in height. Given the fact that we now know that NATS and the Glasgow Prestwick have removed their objections to this application, it's whether or not ultimately you consider the fact that we have 8 turbines there, which are going to be different from the existing consented scheme, with 1 being to a tip height of 145 metres, 5 to a tip height of 125 metres, a further 1 to 119 metres, another 1 to 110 metres, as set out at paragraph 11 and page 7 of your papers, members. I just thought it would be helpful when you are considering matters that given we have a consent for a wind farm at this site, it's now just looking at, given the differences in the height, what would those implications be for a wind farm at this area for you to consider. I would also point out, members, as you'll be fully aware, having read the papers, there are a number of proposed planning conditions at the back of the report which seek to mitigate some of the issues that have been raised. And you'll also see that, particularly when you look at conditions 34 and conditions 35, which are in pages 96 to 98, that they deal with the situation regarding radar mitigation particularly, but there are a number of other conditions proposed there to provide a way by which the development can progress and be built out. Should members consider that the increase in height here is acceptable on its planning merits. The only other thing I was going to mention was that any issue regarding subsidies is not a relevant planning consideration.
Kevin, do you have anything to add to this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, Ara has nothing to add to this.
I think my mic's not working. At this point, I would like to ask if anyone wants any clarification on any part of the paper or have any questions to bring forward. I have one myself that I want clarification on, and that is on the issue of peat handling. And if someone would care to answer that, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of peat, the applicant has undertaken peat probing on the site, and they've investigated that. There are some areas of deep peat, but by and large, the infrastructure tends to avoid the deepest peat. There is a condition in there requiring a peat management plan, and therefore any excavated peat through any construction would have to be handled and managed and stored correctly to ensure the integrity, if you like, of the peat is maintained. Then that peat would be stored and reused as part of restoration, either post-construction, immediately post-construction for track verges, or as you get to the end of the operational lifetime, it can be used to restore areas where previously it was excavated, essentially. But there is a condition within the report to secure the appropriate handling and storage of peat.
Thank you. Yes, David.
Just to briefly add to that for members,
as Craig pointed out, there's no physical change in terms of the actual on the ground impact from this. It is just the increased height of turbines. So the matter of peat was investigated under the last application, so there should be no change from what was previously found to be acceptable in terms of the impacts on peat from this development. So that should be the same for this application as it was for the last one, and we're obviously content, as was the reporter, that any impacts on peat were acceptable.
Members? There's a gentleman on the floor asking.
Not at this stage.
Sorry, sir, not at this position. There is one more question I'd like to ask, and it's about restoration. We've seen some poor results. I want to know what's in place, and perhaps the members need some reminding. What's in place for restoration, and if the money will be available to restore correctly?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the Council has consulted its independent consultants, Ironside Farah, to undertake an assessment of the costs to the Council for having to undertake any decommissioning, restoration and aftercare of the site, should the applicant be unable to do so, or if they're in liquidation or something at some point in the future. Ironside Farah have assessed a quantum value of £1,629,965 as the anticipated cost to the Council for undertaking that works, and the applicant has agreed to that value, and will secure that both by a condition and a Section 75 legal agreement, which will obviously progress after the committee if members were to consent this, and the decision notice would be withheld until the legal agreement was concluded. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I actually ask if you could bring up on your report, it was the wire lines, and it's at viewpoint 6 and at viewpoint 9, please. I want to make sure the members are absolutely satisfied with the visual impacts, and if they can make that decision from the photographs in front of them or of the maps.
Sorry, Chair, what viewpoints were you looking for again?
It was a comparison between the original on the bottom, I believe, or no, on the top, and the new development proposed.
Yes, that's viewpoint 6 there before members, that's at Shawkirk, Drongan. And again, the consented scheme is the one on the top, and the proposed scheme is the one on the bottom. And then I'll move on, and this is from viewpoint 9, which again, this is at Mauchline, and again, you've got the consented scheme at the top and the proposed scheme at the bottom.
Members, do you have any questions on the wireline pictures? In that case, I would like to ask if you feel competent to make the decision with what is in front of you, or if perhaps you would prefer a site visit. These are options open to you, or if there's any conditions you wish to apply or to propose. Thank you. Any proposals then? Okay. Yes, I'll have to propose. Can you hold on 1 second, people? In that case, members, I propose we go by the recommendations on page 2, unless anybody else has a further motion or any further conditions.
No, that's fine.
Second.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Friel. Sorry, Councillor Watts, I think you came in just at the end there. Thank you. Anybody otherwise minded? Councillor Lennox?
Chair, I'd like to propose that we reject the application on the grounds of visual impact in the local amenity. I think the current application they have is quite adequate, and I think we need to take cognizance of the people in that local area. So I'd like to propose that we reject the application.
Thank you, Councillor Lennox.
Chair, before we have a sector, Councillor Lennox, I'm just wondering, obviously, you've got a very full report there, and is it in relation to any particular policies or any particular conditions? Because I'm just so that for the purposes of the minute, just so that we're clear on what what the thinking is, just before we look to see if there's any seconder.
It's just that I think the recommendation states that the visual impact is acceptable, and I think that can be quite subjective. I think if you were a resident in Sinclairson or Hay Hill or Rankiston, you would think otherwise. I'm just a bit concerned about the lack of representation from the local community groups. Obviously, there will be financial benefits to the local community groups, and that may be swaying their inputs into this particular application. So it's really in terms of visual impact, increased visual impact.
I'd just like to say something on that before I bring Craig in. I believe that all community councils were consulted and only one came back after the consultation. And when it comes to community benefits, these are not a material consideration. And is that correct? And they're different to developers' contributions, which are obligatory. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you. And now I'll go over to Craig before we look for a seconder.
I think, Chair, I'm not trying to be difficult. It was just to see if the Councillor Lennox, whether or not, particularly if there were, is it your position that there are specific perhaps policies in the LDP and that perhaps you feel that having regard to the visual impacts, is it just specifically visual impacts rather than cumulative visual impacts? And it was just more whether or not you felt that in terms of your recommendation to refuse, there were particular policies that you felt it didn't comply with moving that forward. Because I'm conscious there's a number of policies obviously mentioned in the report, and I just wondered if there were any particular policies that you felt it didn't comply with, so that we can establish that before we move to see if there is a seconder. You'll see there is a full suite of policies that have been referred to, within the papers. For example, policy RE3, and I think also in terms of the minerals plan. There are policies there, I think, in terms of, for example, the overarching policy. It was just to see if there were any particular ones that you felt were particularly pertinent because, moving forward. And as I say, apologies, not trying to be difficult, it's just so for the purposes of the minute, we've got an idea of what we're putting down.
To be honest, I'm not expertise enough to be able to talk to any of those specific policies. My concern is quite simply the increased visual impact from the current application that's been approved to the new one that's on the table.
If it would help then, Councillor Lennox, I'm aware that in terms of policy RE3, there was a detailed discussion about visual impact. So would it be your position that you feel, notwithstanding what's said in the report, that in terms of visual impact, you don't feel that the application would comply with RE3 and probably any corresponding elements of OP1? Together with, obviously, in terms of the mineral, the local development plan, I'm conscious that certainly we have there clearly the overarching policy that does talk about no unacceptable impacts on, the landscape, the character, appearance, the amenity of the rural area. Is that more what you're
Thanks
trying
for
to?
putting those words in my mouth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lennox, and thank you, Craig. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Lennox's motion? Okay, and in that case, can I take you to the recommendations, please? Sorry,
Councillor Lennox. In terms of your failure to obtain a seconder, would you wish your dissent recorded within the minute?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Lennox, jumped the gun a bit there. So if we can go back again, please, to the recommendations on page 5. There is 112 pages worth in here, and I appreciate you taking your time to go through all of these. Now, at the recommendations, It is recommended that the planning application be approved with conditions and the decision notice is to be withheld until a Section 75 agreement consistent with council policy is completed and registered with the keeper. And the conditions are listed in there. Thank you. Just to note, we will note Councillor Lennox's dissent on this issue. Thank you, Councillor Lennox. And I think that concludes the hearing for this morning for agenda item 3.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, the decision of the committee is that the application has been approved, subject to the conditions and for the reasons detailed in the report, and that the decision notice be withheld until the Section 75 agreement is completed and registered with the keeper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you to our guests today in the gallery. We're going to move on to agenda item 4 now, please. I'm just going to pause for a second. Yeah, everybody, thank you for that. And if we can move on now, please. So agenda item 4 is compliance monitoring update of major environmental developments in East Ayrshire. That's pages 113 to 148. And this is to submit the report dated the 3rd of August. Copy enclosed by the Chief Governance Officer providing an update to the Planning Committee in respect of compliance monitoring actively relating to environmental projects which are subject to planning permission and other consents and comprising the following development types: open-cast coal, quarries, landfill, onshore wind farms and the electrical interconnector between the periods 1st of April 2022 to 30th of June 2022. And that's Barry.
Thanks, Chair. As you just said, this compliance report provides an update on the major environmental developments, including open-cast coal restoration sites, quarries, landfill, onshore wind farms and electrical infrastructure projects during their construction, operation and restoration phases. This report covers the period from the 1st of April 2022 to the 30th of June 2022. Appendices 1 to 8 of the report provides the main detail of the developments, and the report provides a summary of the main points which I'll go through before showing some photos. So I will go into a little bit more in the background of some of the sites for the benefit of some of the newer members who are maybe not quite so aware. So starting firstly with the open-cast coal sites. These sites are the open-cast sites which have been operated and restored by the respective operators and have not involved the use of bond monies or public funding. All of these sites are either in their restoration or aftercare phases now, with coaling finished around 3 years ago. First is Greenburn, which is owned by Keir Mining. The Greenburn complex has been under restoration for approximately 5 years, or longer than 5 years, I should say, and is almost completely restored. As per paragraph 10 in the report, infrastructure works comprising 2 public road underpasses, a concrete pad and rail head remain to be restored. Other than that, the site is being monitored in its aftercare phase, including the remaining void water levels. Adjacent to Greenburn is House of Water, which is operated by Hargreaves, where site clearance works have been ongoing, with the restoration almost complete and in accordance with the approved restoration programme. While water ground levels have been rebounding, an area of groundwater resurgence was noted in a low area between the access road and the River Nith. This has been managed by the operator, with the water being filtered through vegetation before discharging to the River Nith. The operator has liaised with SEPA on this matter, and they are content with the water quality and the method of discharging the water to the Nith. Like House of Water, Duncan Newmer is another privately owned site, having been taken over by Hargreaves following liquidation of their previous operator in 2013. Limited restoration works have been completed here in accordance with the scheme approved by Planning Committee back in 2013. The operator has removed a remaining concrete structure and infilled a culvert, which was used for a conveyor belt for transporting coal off the site. A report on the conclusion of works here will come to the Planning Committee in due course, likely to be September. Moving on to the Opencast coal restoration projects. So these are the sites which were left abandoned following liquidation of their operators. Restoration has primarily been led by the council using bond monies where available and other funding sources. Restoration of most sites has been carried out by Mines Restoration Limited, which is a subsidiary of Scottish Mines Restoration Trust. If the new members would like to know more of the background to this, they should read the report which went to full council in March, which provides a comprehensive summary of the background as well as progress and conclusion of restoration. As noted within the compliance report at paragraph 11, almost all of the restoration projects have been successfully completed. The only remaining site is a second phase of works at Chalmerston, which is being affected by the and we have two under construction in the area at the moment. South Kyle Wind Farm infrastructure works are almost complete, with the restoration of borrow pits and other temporary construction areas ongoing. Turbine deliveries commence during the reporting period as well and will be constructed soon, if not now. Compliance has generally been good, with some issues of runoff noted, as well as peat spalling from steep verges, which is currently being addressed. As noted in paragraph 18, an issue of compliance has arisen in regard to the retention of blade fingers, which are the lay-down areas for turbine blades. The council's view is that these are temporary areas and require to be removed or restored, and discussions have been taking place with the developer in order to find an acceptable solution to this. Snedden Law Wind Farm commenced construction in last reporting quarter, and since then works have mainly comprised the formation of the access track and a compound area. Construction so far has generally been compliant, as noted in paragraph 20. Whiteley, which has been operational for some time, paragraph 19 notes the long-standing delay in the conclusion of the bond review, which has continued throughout the reporting period. Moving on to the South West Scotland Electrical Infrastructure Project. This has been ongoing with no particular issues noted within paragraphs 24 to 29. So this is in its restoration phase now and has been carried out very successfully on the whole. So I will move on to some photos now of some of the sites, if you bear with me. Right, so this is a Duncan Newmer, and this is the concrete structure which I had spoken about. This was used for loading coal onto a conveyor belt, and that has now been removed as per this photograph. And this is a public road culvert where the conveyor belt ran through, and that's before photo and after, and it's been infilled in this area here. It used to run under the road at this point, and the other side of the road as well. Greenburn, this is a view of the Braehead wetland area, which is now in aftercare. And the Dalgig Void, where water levels are being monitored and have stabilised for the last few months. So we don't think it's going to raise any higher without any need for the overspill channel here. There shouldn't be any need for that to be used. And this is the underpasses, which I referred to earlier as well, which are the remaining infrastructure that remains to be restored. House of Water. This is the area of water resurgence, which I've spoken about between the access track and the River Nith. And that's a channel that's been used to discharge it to the River Nith, which is over in this area. And again, so it's been filtered through vegetation further up. This is the House of Water remaining void, which is also being monitored. You can see a Diljig void in the background there as well. This is all fenced off. You know, we're content with the safety features that are on here. Just a quick photograph of Hare Hill Extension. This is showing the establishment of tree growth within the habitat management area. Snedden Law. So there are some photographs here which show some of the progress. This area shows part of it's an area of floating track, which was formed by laying brash and timber and a geotech membrane followed by stone. What this photo shows is the geotech, the area shown in the photo was the peat was deeper than anticipated in this photo at this point of the track, and in which case that the track settled significantly, requiring an additional 1.5 to 2 metres of stone before settling. This was due to a combination of factors, including the depth of the peat and the age of the timber used. You can see here that the brash is old timber, which is referred to as grey timber. The grey timber failed, as can be seen by the vertical stands here at the side of the road, and the developer has addressed the issue by using green timber, which is a newer timber going forward. The developer has, this appears to be one of, if not the deepest area of the site where the tracks are to be laid, and the culverts will be relayed once settlement is complete. This shows additional felling to mitigate against wind throw onto spine track. This peat is of high water content, so normally that can't be used for reinstatement purposes. So other options are being investigated on site, including the formation of peat cells on height for habitat improvement. This shows an area of peat disturbance due to the spine track sinking, and works will be scheduled once settlement has completed. Apologies for the quality of some of these photos. The rising green timber is being used on the remaining floating track, as I've noted earlier, so this should be stronger and be able to withhold the weight of the stone. This is a ditch near the Polbeath burn, and we've asked for additional dams to be used here to flow down the water rate and also as a filter. And this shows the Bellmouth access formed onto the public road. Moving on to photos, South Kyle. This is showing brash stored on one of the crane pad extremities, and a connection compound building which is nearing completion. This is an example of brash which has been mixed with peat in various restoration. SEPA have been involved in this because there is a concern that there is maybe too much brash being used for this purpose, rather than it being disposed of by another means. And again, another example of excessive brash in restored areas. This is just an area of a minor peat slip within a borrow pit, and an improved restored batter along one of the access tracks. I did at the last compliance report, the last compliance report noted there was an issue with peat spalling from the verge of spur 15. and the applicant was looking at ways of mitigating and resolving this problem. So this is part of the solution to this problem, which is keying in stone to aid stability and drainage. And I believe there is also a filter drain which has been installed to the top of the slope. I'll just run through these photos more quickly because there are a few of them. This is showing the restored borrow pit 3 and a view towards completed base for one of the towers. And a more wider view of substation and the junction in borrow pit 2. And South West Scotland interconnector project, Black Hills substation. So this is the line here, and it's, as noted within the report, we are content with how well it's been restored and revegetated around the concrete bases, the tower bases. This showing the revegetation of one of the areas. And again, and again. And again. Route C Afton. This is one of the mitigation methods used around the Afton water in order to prevent pollution of this public water source. And just showing restoration levels are tying in well to landform. Restoration underway and complete. Again, revegetation around the tower bases. So just to summarise the recommendation within report at paragraph 2, recommendation is to note the progress of each of the projects within the report and appendices. Note that no formal enforcement action has been undertaken or necessary, and otherwise note the contents of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you for the visuals. The visuals always help. Do we have any questions for Barry? I know she's interested to explain the background of any of the areas that you don't understand or haven't visited before, rather. Councillor Filson.
Just on South Kyle, there was a locally report that a lot of the stone was having to come back out. Some of the where we put up some of the pylons there in the South Interconnector. Is that still the case? It was going to come up, have to come through Dalmellington. Loads and loads of lorries. I spoke to Care Chalmers at the time, Kevin. But I think that's not the case now. I think they've found they were going to take some to another Opencast, I think, and dump it there rather than having to bring it through Dalmellington again. But just if you could update me on that.
If you recall, maybe a year or so ago, there was a proposal through a traffic management plan to bring stone through Dalmellington and also along Afton Road for use elsewhere. So that was part of the restoration proposals. That was approved. However, there was there was quite a lot of concern about that locally, with the amount of traffic and type of traffic using the roads and where they would be taking the traffic. Since then, as far as I understand, the developer has found other places for the stone to go, which would be a sort of adjoining areas of land, which would involve the use of these roads. It might involve some use of the A713, but that's obviously a road that's well used anyway. But it wouldn't be using the roads through Dalmellington or the Afton Road. So as far as I know, that's still the developer's intention. I haven't heard anything to the contrary, unless anybody else knows.
Councillor Filson, as Aris here, Kevin's going to answer.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Filson, I'm not aware of it, but I can certainly check from an ARA perspective.
Are there any further questions? Okay, in that case, we'll go to the recommendations. And these are for noting only, and they're on page 113. And it is to note the progress, support and status of each of the environmental projects detailed in the appendices 1 to 8. Note that no formal enforcement action has been undertaken or warranted at any of the sites, and otherwise note the contents of the report. Are we agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Just before we go on to the next topic and following what we saw there, I would like to recommend that we go on a site visit, not a site visit associated with any particular paper that's coming up, but to give you some idea for the ones that are new to planning of the scale of the work that is going on in restoration. I think if we're agreed on that. I know we enjoyed it the last time. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so, okay.
Sorry, Chair, if the members are agreed, we can probably just add it on as an action or a recommendation for that last item we've just dealt with.
Okay. We are going to try and arrange a programme of visits. We know we all have such busy schedules, so these will not be frivolous visits. I think they'll help inform how we make our decisions at planning. Thank you. Okay, members, if we can go on to the final item today's agenda, item number 5. Again, it's for noting, it's an update report on the progress of planning applications which have been recommended for approval, which are subject to the conclusion of an appropriate legal agreement and/or legacy planning applications in East Ayrshire. And that's on pages 149 to 157 of your papers. And it's over to David Wilson. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So repeating bad habits there. Morning and morning to members. This will be a fairly short presentation. It's a fairly short report, as you'll have seen from the papers. It's a quarterly update. So the report is a quarterly report on progress with applications subject to legal agreement or the legacy planning applications. This particular report is covering the period April to June inclusive. For members' awareness, this quarterly reporting was introduced in March 2021 as a result of efforts to improve the Council's scoring on the annual planning performance framework process, which sees each Scottish planning authority measured by the Scottish Government against approximately 15 different key performance markers. In respect of legal and legacy cases, the Government target is to try to conclude legal agreements within 6 months of a minded to grant position. And in respect of legacy, to minimise or eliminate the number of planning applications that have been live for more than 1 year since they were made valid. In terms of this reporting quarter, paragraphs 10 and 11 and Appendix Table 1 show that there are 6 applications awaiting conclusion of the legal agreement, which is 1 fewer than the last reporting quarter. 1 further application has since been concluded, although it was after this reporting period. It was concluded just at the start of July, so it remains in here to represent the quarter that we're looking at. As noted in the table and in the report, all the applications are considered to be progressing satisfactorily. In respect of legacy applications, paragraphs 12 and 13 and Appendix Table 2 show that there are 19 legacy applications, with 2 being cleared in the reporting quarter, but 8 new cases being added, resulting in 6 more legacy applications than the last reporting quarter. Many of these applications are under processing agreements, which project manages the application to revise timescales. A number of these applications will be cleared in the next reporting quarter, noting that 1 has already been cleared. All cases continue to progress satisfactorily and will be taken forward to decision in due course. Members are just asked to note the content of the report and the actions in each application set out in the tables, which essentially allow continued progress on each legacy and legal agreement application, with no cases requiring to be returned for reconsideration. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions on any of the applications.
Any questions online? Okay, thank you, David.
Councillor Watts.
Oh, Councillor Watts.
Yes, sorry, I was a bit slow on the hand there. On page 156, the top item 200633 PP, regarding the housing development at Rig Road. I noted that it's delegated application, but it's nearing completion. What was the reason for the officer delay with that application?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact reasons for delay. The common reasons are that the applicant is maybe asked to do something extra, either by a consultee or something needs to be changed or revised to improve the development, or otherwise negotiate with the applicant. The delay is not usually just a case of the officer not pushing it forward. There's always a kind of reason or a negotiation of some sorts going on, and quite often we'll be back to the applicant for further information, so there can be delays in waiting for that before information is submitted, and then perhaps it needs reconsulted out to either consultees and or neighbours again for further comment. So that's the kind of common ones. That one in particular, I don't know the exact reasons for the various delays during it, but that would be the kind of common reasons for delays to take things on like that.
Right, okay.
Councillor Watts, I'm sure David Wilson would be happy to bring an answer to you specifically on that later, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Claire. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay, everybody, if there's no further questions, we go to the recommendations, please. Recommendations are in place 149, if your papers are still in one piece. Okay. It is recommended that the Planning Committee note the content of the report, note the recommendation actions in each applicant subject to a legal agreement over the 6-month target period, and finally note the recommendation actions on each legacy application. So with that, that's finished for the morning, and thank you very much for your attendance.